Tell me about your Polish heritage. I'm sure our audience would find this interesting to know that there's a Polish-speaking judge presiding over cases at the 26th in California.
Yes, I think I'm the only one. There's definitely Polish judges of Polish heritage, and some of them do speak, I believe, some Polish. But I was actually born in Poland. So
Really?
I was born close to Wrocław. It's a little town called Namysłów. Grew up there, went to first grade there, came here and started second grade here. My father was already here, so I have brothers, and my mom and I came to join my father here and was a Polish speaker and kept the language, thankfully. Now I thank my mom for sending me to Polish school, which at the time probably wasn't that happy about going. But
Did you go on Saturdays?
Yes, on Saturdays, Saturday mornings, right in the neighborhood. There was a Catholic school that I went to, a grammar school, and they also had Polish school. So, did the Polish school on Saturday mornings, and sometimes I didn't want to go, but I did, and I'm now thankful that I did that because I think it helped me keep the language.
I am Greg Czubernat, an injury attorney in Chicago, and this is the Czubernat podcast. You can learn more about my work at czubernatlaw.com. My guest today is Judge Ursula Walowski, a felony court judge who spent years deciding the fate of others. Let's go off the record. What would you say to parents and kids these days who are complaining like you did and I did when I was in Polish school? What would you tell them to basically suck it up and continue?
Yes, to continue, because having knowledge of another language, more than one is great, right? But just going to school and being able to once a week for that period of time, that helps you keep that language, because as we all know, you have to use it or you lose it. So I was fortunate enough to be able to use it at home and then continue with it in the Polish school, because it's something that when you grow up, my nieces and nephews now complain. They're like, oh, we should have continued with the language because we kind of didn't, and then you stop speaking it at home because you get Americanized, right? Or my brothers and I, we stopped speaking Polish in the home outside of my extended family, mom, dad, uncles, aunts. So I think it's a wonderful thing to try to keep it up, because it's something that you will always have a benefit from throughout your life if you know another language. And the other thing is to keep your heritage alive, right? And that's how you do it, through speaking. I wish I could get through this podcast speaking in Polish, but probably if we delve into some things, I'd be trying to catch the words or remember words in Polish, because my Polish vocabulary probably is not as great anymore. But
And I'm sure your Polish language also comes very handy when you travel. I'm assuming you did travel to Poland,
yes,
probably more than once.
Yes.
I remember my Polish school. I went to a Polish school on Saturday that was hosted at the Curie High School.
Yeah.
So I went to Curie High School during the week for regular high school, and then on Saturday I had to come back for the Polish school. And I remember I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all, but my parents, luckily for me, were persistent that I should stick with it.
Same with me, yeah. And that's the advice as you started this. That's the advice I would give parents, just to be persistent. The kids will complain, but they will go. And I had friends in Polish school. You socialized in Polish school. You had after-school events or events that were sponsored by the Polish school, or different activities. I think there was like recitals, different type of poetry type situations.
Yes, you're definitely exposed to it.
Correct.
Different traditions, even around Christmas or Thanksgiving. There's always something culturally different and relevant going on.
Yeah, and you have that cultural aspect of it where you learn a lot from others in the same culture, as far as the Polish culture. So I just thought it was fantastic. So that part I didn't mind, right? It's just sometimes getting up on Saturday mornings when nobody else had to and you had to for Polish school. But you get through it, right? Kids get through these things. So.
Do you participate in Polish schools or Polish community at all?
Well, to the extent that our Polish school, my son was going to a Polish school, but our Polish school closed down because of our parish closed down. So that kind of took a hit. We took a hit with that because that no longer was part of our community. But I live in an area on the Northwest side where there's a lot of Polish businesses. There's, certain churches have the Polish Mass. So I support a lot of the Polish businesses. I go to my Polish bakery. I go to the Polish deli. I go to, the banquet halls or whatever it may be. At the Polish restaurants. So I'm a big supporter, and I just like doing that just to support the Polish business community and tell people I'm going, and then tell other people, hey, this is a great place to go. So to that, in that aspect, yes, I would say I am active. And then with the Polish Judges Association, or as an attorney, the Polish Advocate Society, anything that you can participate in, that you can, be a part of it and then expand it to others or teach others about it, I guess. I enjoy doing. So I'm proud of, I was born there. I'm proud of my Polish heritage.
That is very interesting. My sales pitch about Polish schools, I tell whoever will listen, that I met my eye doctor at a Polish school. We went to Polish school together. And I remember this a few years back during a snowstorm. I was trying to start up a snowblower, and I sprayed one of the chemicals right in my eyes, both of them. And I remember she was kind enough. She opened the clinic and washed me up, and I didn't have to sit at the ER over Christmas. So see, that came from the connections I made at the Polish school.
Right, and the networking, the bonding you get to make with other people that are part of your same ancestry, your Polish heritage. I think it's great.
Before we dive into the law, I must ask, what do you do after hours when you're ready to go home, when you're ready to unplug? What do you do that allows you to leave the work behind?
There's nothing particular. It's just I just leave the work behind. When I go home, I have a family. I have responsibilities at home. I'll usually, working out or stretching, yoga, that's done in the morning, because then after work, you just kind of want to go home, take care of, the house, as they say, take care of my son, my dog, and just, transition into family life. So it's not much. It's just I do leave work behind, and then I go into another responsibility of mine, right? Taking care of the family.
Is there anything that you're passionate about that people who only know you as a judge would be shocked to learn?
I don't think there's anything shocking. I love sports, and a lot of people that know me know that. Love my Cubs. I'm a Cubs season ticket holder. I love the Bears, love the Blackhawks. I'm very much a sports enthusiast. So sports are definitely a major part of my life. But no, other than that, I love dogs. I love my dog, love my family. So just kind of typical, I guess. Nothing shocking.
Nothing shocking. Can you take us back to the moment when you decided you wanted to be the judge? Because I know most lawyers, we want to be the star advocate, star trial attorney. But I'm curious how you came about the decision that you want to be the one wearing the robe, making the final decision.
I would just say it's just kind of progressed throughout my career, because my whole career I've been involved in the criminal field for the most part. Even though when I did start out as a lawyer, I worked for the First National Bank of Chicago, it was called back then, in 1993, because I worked at the bank in sort of in the accounting department, for lack of an easy explanation. My first experience was as a lawyer, was working for the First National Bank of Chicago, and that was mostly commercial litigation type things. And I worked at the bank in accounting, but in the meantime, I also clerked during law school for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. So I clerked at 26th in California at the criminal division. And then from there, I just wanted to become a prosecutor. But yet, there was the aspect of, well, I could make money going into something other than, public service or not-for-profit, even though that's where my passion was. It wasn't really about making money as a lawyer. It was more about the public service aspect of it. So that kind of guided my career. That's why, eventually I stopped working at the bank and I became a Cook County State's Attorney and stayed there for 15 years. Went through different assignments, ended up in the gang crimes unit, which was a lot of it was gang murders, gang shootings. So kind of complex cases, complex murder cases, complex issues in a lot of the cases. So eventually I got to a point in the state's attorney's office where my career developed to the more serious, cases, murder trials and jury trials, and doing more of those. And the more I did them, I think the more comfortable I was, and I wanted to continue doing public service. And I think at just one point I said, well, I think I could be a judge because I love the law. I loved, arguing cases, research. So I think it was just a natural progression, because being a state's attorney, a lot of former state's attorneys or public defenders move on to be judges because it's still more public service. It's just at a different level, of course. So I think it's almost kind of, to me, it seemed like a natural progression.
Natural fit.
And I thought one of my big attributes or things that I'm proud of is being efficient. And I think that's important as a judge, to be efficient and not to waste anybody's time, not to waste the attorney's time, not to waste witness time, the parties, the plaintiffs, the defendants. Everybody comes to court, and the last thing that I like to see is them waiting around all day to get something done. I just, that's why you try to schedule things so for the appropriate amount of time, so that the case gets the amount of time that's appropriate on the case and nobody's waiting around. So kind of long story short, right? I think becoming a judge was just kind of something that seemed to me that I said, you know what, I think I want to try this. I think I might be good at it, and let's campaign and see if people elect me. So I was fortunate enough to be elected, and then pretty much since my election in 2008, so almost 17 years, generally in a criminal realm. So it was in a domestic violence courtroom for a long time, and then moved to the criminal division.
Have you ever considered civil side of the legal system?
Yeah, and if there was a need, or if I was asked, or there was part of me that felt, well, maybe I should try to do a different area of the law just because I've been doing criminal law for so long. But then I end up just going back to what I know, I guess. So, and I mean, if I wouldn't turn it down if there was an opportunity, and the chief said, we would like to see if you could come to the law division or something, I wouldn't, I would definitely consider it. I may say yes, but for my career so far as a judge, it just seemed that the natural progression was to end up in a criminal division in a big courtroom and try a bunch of jury trials.
You brought up an interesting point earlier in our discussion about the need to balance and compare your passions with the financial aspect of things. You were fortunate enough to be able to make the decision, but plenty of law students who graduate these days with a ton of debt, they don't always know what to do. Should they pursue their passions, even though they may take a financial hit, or maybe spend a few years at some big law corporate job that actually pays the bills?
Well, I would say it would be the reverse would be better, right? Why not start at in the public service sector? Why not hone your skills as a lawyer? Because you learn a lot in the public sector, or even not at a not-for-profit. You get to deal with, people that have significant hardships, right? So you're able to not only help people, which I think is, one of the things that every lawyer should strive to do, is because that's what the law is all about, right? Trying to make things fair and just and help people. And starting out in maybe not as a high pay, the job may not be high paying, and you may have debt. I had debt. I had a lot of debt when I graduated. So, the debt, you eventually pay off the debt. But the experience that I got, and then being able to use that experience now to later in life to be qualified to run for a judge and to get elected, and the networking and the experience, I think was invaluable. So I would say, I get that everybody wants to make money, right, doing especially law with how expensive law school is. But I would say, I mean, that's a debt just like a mortgage, right? A mortgage is something that most people have to get because nobody can pay, full cash for a house, right? But it's an investment that you make and you get a mortgage out. So it's the same in your education, right? You make an investment in your education, and then eventually the more experience you have, I think the money will come with that. So I think the focus, I guess I was never one to focus on the money aspect of it. I was more in the, trying to help people and hone my skills and try to be the best lawyer I could be.
Can you remember your first case that you presided over and you had to physically stop yourself from rooting for one side to the case?
The answer to that question is no. I don't ever remember having that difficulty, because when I decided to run for judge and then I was elected, and then, my first day on the bench, first of all, I almost forgot my robe. I just went out there without my robe. I went, oops, I have to go back and get my robe. And then, everybody's rising for you. But that experience of your first time on the bench, that you have a specific job to do. And your job is not to take sides. Your job is not to root for one side or the other. Your job is to be fair and decide the issues before you as best you can based on the law. So I personally never had that situation where I felt like, oh, I want this person to win or this person to win. I think, and as a judge, I would give that to advice to any judge that's fresh on the bench, is you have to realize what your position is now. And your position is not an advocate anymore. Your position is a judge to decide matters between two parties in a fair and just way. And you're not rooting for one side or the other. You're making your decision based on the law, based on your interpretation of the law, an analysis that you're making. That's why I would advise judges to do their own research, or if they have law clerks, read the law that is given to them, because a lot of cases within them have an analysis. How do you go about deciding a case, right? There's law all over the place that will help you as a judge if you want to read it, and be prepared. So that if you do go into becoming a judge, your first day on the bench, or, you're 3 years down the road, you should always take the bench with the aspect of, I know what my job is, and I want to be true to what I have to do as a judge, and not root for one side or the other, and not even think about being in that position. So that's how I would answer that question.
Is it easy to turn off your litigator's side of brain?
Well, that part of it, there were cases probably where, as a former assistant state's attorney, I'd be like, well, I would have argued this, or I would have argued that, or I would have done this. But, after the fact, you kind of, think about what you may have argued, or if I was the defense, I would have hit this, or I would have hit that, right? Especially jury trials, because in that aspect, you're listening, and you're not making the ultimate decision of guilt or innocence. So you listen to what the attorneys decide to argue in their cases. So, there's definitely times where I'm like, oh, you could have argued this or that or the other. So yeah, you think about that, and you come back to your, old trial skills or whatever. And a lot of times I share my experiences if attorneys want to, I would tell them about a case I would have as a prosecutor or a murder jury. And, in this scenario, I chose to do this argument, or I chose to do this or that. If they want to hear about it, I mean, if they don't, it's okay. But if they want to hear about it, I'm happy to, well, this is what I did, and it worked in a good way for me. So maybe, in this scenario, because everything is case specific too. So it's hard to just pinpoint it, like in all cases that have this, there's no such thing. I don't think you could really corner anything to that aspect, to that, in that way. But
how often do you actually get attorneys who are not ashamed, I want to say, to ask for your advice?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of lawyers that are open, but I don't want to force it on a lawyer either. I mean, it's okay if don't want to, you don't want to. But yeah, I mean, especially in situations where you're just you kind of, the jury, let's say a jury is out deliberating, whatever, and then you're just sitting there, maybe just, talking to the attorneys and, over nothing, just chit-chatting because you're kind of have to get the time to go by, right? And attorneys are curious. Well, did you ever have this scenario or this scenario? And I'm happy to. So there is a lot of times I have attorneys asking, but I think it's something that I try to make attorneys comfortable enough to where they're willing to do that or ask the question. So I think as a judge, you have to be open to that because then I think you'll give that vibe like attorneys are comfortable enough to ask you, And obviously I can't talk about pending cases or anything like that, but I mean, my experience as an attorney, sure.
Lately, we have all seen the reports about cases where attorneys cited cases that are not existent, I guess, using AI.
Right, AI, right.
Have you seen anything like that in your courtroom?
What? Not so far. Everything that I get, a lot of times it's case law that is rather recent or something. Because in criminal law, we constantly have case law that's coming out that, updates a certain issue, okay? So I have not had that experience, but I know that, if you just rely on AI, they're going to give you sites that, so, once again, as a judge, I read the case law that is submitted to me. And when I do my own research, I read the cases because that's the only way you know it's real, right? So I think that's something that should be done. I mean, I guess people do take shortcuts, and AI is a shortcut. And, sometimes it works, but I would say proofread your work, especially before you submit it in any sort of filing, right? Whatever court you're in, if you're doing AI research, which is fine, it'll give you ideas, but I would proofread it and check your sites and actually pull up the case law before you actually file it, and then, could be in danger with a judge of submitting made-up case law.
From the bench, you have the ultimate bird's eye view of what's happening in the courtroom, what witnesses do, what lawyers do. What do you see that we as lawyers, as court-going audience, completely miss and don't even pay attention to?
Well, I think as a lawyer, you're paying attention to your client and the judge, right? And you may not, sometimes you're not even pay attention to the opposing party.
You just listen for the case name.
Because, you're waiting for your case and to come up. And in a criminal courtroom, there's just a lot of things that are going on. I mean, people are coming in and out. A lot of courtrooms at 26 and Cal are busy courtrooms. So you have probation officers, you have galleries full of people that sometimes may not get along because you have, defendant's family. I mean, for instance, something as serious as a murder case, right? You have defendant's family there supporting the defendant, and you have a victim's family. That's obviously they've lost a loved one, right? And they're across from each other in a courtroom. So sometimes things, erupt. There's things that go wrong. So I think my aspect of it from the bench is I kind of try and see everything. I don't, I try to pay attention to obviously not only the case in front of me, which I have to pay attention to, but also kind of keep an eye out what's going on in the courtroom. Or if I have a jury in the box, right, to keep an eye on, is there a juror that's sleeping, right? Or are all the jurors awake and paying attention? Is there a juror that needs to go to the bathroom and is trying to get my attention, right? The same thing with, the defense table or the prosecutor's table. Like, is there an attorney that's trying to get my attention to go off the record? Or, is there something that the sheriff wants to, give me a note, or my clerk next to me, right? Or the court reporter. So there's so many moving parts that you see everything because you're the highest one above everything. So you see everything and you should pay attention to everything. You know what I mean? So, I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but there's things that you just got to keep an eye out for, especially when there's a case where there's a lot of emotions, because things can erupt in a courtroom. People could start fighting, which they have in the courtroom. So these are things that you try to keep an eye out so that you could alert the sheriff. So, if something needs to be done, so that I try to minimize disruptions in the courtroom as much as possible. So that kind of, I don't know if that answers your question directly, but you do kind of have a view of everything that not everybody's in the courtroom is going to be looking at.
That is a great point, because as you mentioned, as an attorney waiting for my case to be called, I pay attention to my notes, my client, and just make sure I'm going to stand up when the case is called.
Your client's family in the gallery, you might not even be paying attention to, but I could see they're trying to get your attention, right? So I could say, counsel, just so if you need to talk to the defendant's family, or, I kind of get to see that and then let you know, so that to try to minimize disruptions, but so that everybody kind of gets heard. I think that's my responsibility as a judge, that I'm paying attention to everything, so that if need be, everybody gets heard, or everybody's issue is getting addressed somehow, so that when they leave my courtroom, they're like, okay, she paid attention to me, or she addressed my issue, which is
they feel heard.
Yeah, and which is what my job is, right? So
my clients quite often ask me, counsel, what should I wear to court? What would you tell those people? How should they dress up for court?
Be respectful of a courtroom, right? I guess I'm not as much of a stickler, I guess, in how people dress in a courtroom. And, being involved in a criminal courtroom all these years, I've seen a lot of interesting attire.
What's the craziest one that you remember?
Well, things that come to mind are just T-shirts with probably provocative language on them, or inappropriate things on T-shirts, or, you're, facing a drug case and you got a marijuana leaf, or you're facing a drug case and you have something on your T-shirt that says, cocaine rules or something like that. It's sometimes the choice of attire is quite interesting, that you're probably not a good idea that you wear that to court, right?
Do you think people just don't pay attention, or they want to provoke you?
No, I don't think I don't know that I wouldn't say it's to provoke me or anybody, quite frankly. I think it's more of just the lack of insight, but more than anything, the lack of respect that you're going to a courtroom. And to me, that's one of the things that no matter who you are, and I try to instill that in my courtroom, that if somebody is lounging around or kissing and pretending like they're on a couch, in their bed, in their bedroom or house, that, I call them out on it. This is a courtroom, so I tell my deputies that kind of behavior is not appropriate in a courtroom. So I try to, kind of do that in my courtroom to let people know that when you're coming into a courtroom, whether it's mine or any other courtroom, it's not just me as a judge, but I think a courtroom is a place that should be respected, right? So when you come to a place that should be respected, how you dress should be respectful. If you're a defendant on a case wearing, a nice pair of pants and a button-up shirt, probably not a bad idea, right? To give the right impression that you're respectful of the court, the courtroom.
I tell my clients to dress up as you would for an interview.
Right.
But at the same time, it's been so long since I interviewed. I don't even know what they were to interviews anymore.
Well, and I'm not saying, everybody has to wear a shirt and tie that comes in. That's just not practical to me. But appropriate attire, right? Anything that shows that you're, understand and respect the courtroom and the courtroom process.
Is there anything that we attorneys do that drives you nuts? Is there?
That's a good question. Well, I think because I am very much a judge that likes to be efficient, going back to the efficiency aspect. really think that being efficient in a courtroom is very important, because that allows everybody not only to be heard, but get the appropriate time and their issue addressed in an appropriate time and an appropriate manner, right? So when attorneys come in not prepared, I mean, that's probably I would call a pet peeve, right? And that goes back to, I would advise young lawyers that are just coming out of law school, or even law students in law school, right? Biggest way to get ahead, to me, in the area of law is be prepared. Know what you're going in for. Know what you're doing on that status date, right? What was the status date set for? Is it set for a trial? And then if you're not prepared for trial, why not? Right? I mean, I love when, Judge, I'm just not ready for trial. Okay, great. Thank you for telling me that. But how about, what is the reason you're not ready for trial?
Well,
right?
I'm just stepping up for a friend. I know nothing.
Right. Well, and that's fine. Well, the counsel, but then you're giving me the reason why you're there, and that counsel is ill or involved in another case and couldn't get away. So you're giving me some reason, right? That's all I ask for, is like a reason. Because when, for me to grant you a continuance, let's say, right, I would like to hear a reason why you're not ready, so that there's a reason I'm granting you a continuance. I don't think that's too much to ask for. And quite frankly, you don't want to keep continuing a case over and over again. And once again, that's inefficient. That, I don't know if your client even is agreeing to this, or he's happy with it. And then, the opposing side, whether it's a civil or criminal case, maybe calling witnesses from out of state and is having them ready on a day of trial, right? And going through a bunch of things. And the opposing counsel come in and says, I'm just not ready. And the judge is like, oh, okay. I mean, that doesn't seem right? Doesn't seem fair or just or at all. So, I mean, it's an old, right? Eagle Scout, Girl Scout, whatever, be prepared. Know what you're going into a courtroom for. Be prepared. As a law student, what do you got to do for this class the next day? Did the teacher tell you to read a case, right? And, how about just in any aspect of the law, because it's so, to me, you should read. There's so much reading, right? As a lawyer, there's a lot of reading and analyzing and thinking that, before you go into a courtroom, you should be prepared. I mean, not too much to ask for, but yet still, after all these years, still amazed how many times I will have attorneys just not prepared and not giving me a good excuse of why they're not prepared.
That was my follow-up question.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if there's any common excuse that comes up.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could see, well, Judge, we're still continuing our investigation, Well, then I delve into that a little bit. Oh, really? Well, what are you looking for, a particular witness? And then, how long have you been looking for this witness? Is this witness somebody that is going to be able to be found? I mean, so, and it's almost like I'm, deer in the headlights look when I start asking more questions. So it's just easy, just know what you're doing and be prepared, right? And if you have a filing due, then file something. If you need more time to file something, well, then file something in the meantime, and then say, Judge, I do expect to supplement this filing. I just didn't have the time to, research this particular issue. So I'm filing something today because it was, I had a filing due. So you're showing the judge in the court that you're, mindful of that there was a filing expected. You show the judge that you're doing something about it. And just, there's a particular thing that you still didn't get to, that you still want to research. And you say, Judge, can I have another 30 days or whatever it is to supplement the filing I have today? I mean, it'll go a long way with a judge, right?
We all grew up on TV shows like Law and Order, for example. I'm curious, what is it about the felony court that TV series get completely wrong?
Almost everything. It's interesting because there's so many like shows like Law and Order, right? For instance, has been around forever. I mean, at least I give that show some credit for laying out that, the police officer's job is one thing and then a prosecutor's job is in court, right? So at least they
They keep it separate.
They kind of explain that aspect of it. Unlike, other shows where, you go to a crime scene and within an hour you have DNA and everything else, which it just, yeah, I mean, TV is TV, right? It's entertainment and they have to put everything in an hour. So they're not going to be able to get it right. Because, and it's interesting because of TV shows like that the jury, somebody that comes in and gets selected as a juror, has this, right, this kind of a predetermined idea of what may happen. I mean, you read the charges to a jury and the person is charged with first-degree murder and they're like, oh my God, right? But I mean, it's a charge. So you don't know anything about it, right? Quite yet. And I have to sometimes remind jurors that simply because of the charge, you haven't heard what the evidence is. So you can't be automatically, right, have a thing like, oh my God, it's murder. It must be serious. He must have done it, right? Like you have to advise jurors. That's why the jury selection process requires us to do a lot of explaining about the procedure and what's done. Because, and then it's funny because of TV shows, jurors after a verdict will be like, well, why didn't they present DNA? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do this? Right? So the jurors become their own kind of detectives back there. Right? And I think it's influenced by various shows, crime shows they watch. Because I'm telling you, so many times I ask the question of, what do you like to do in your spare time? Is there some kind of TV shows you like to watch, things you like to read? What do you like to read? Kind of a general idea about what the hobbies, interests of the juror is. And so many say, oh, I love the true crime podcast, or I love the, crime TV shows, things like that. So they're already coming in with that. So now they hear about a case and, it's going to take more, usually more complex trials that go to jury will take a couple of days or up to a week, or something even more complex could, take 2 weeks. So now they're hearing all this evidence, right? And then they go back and then they're kind of doing their own detective work, right? Piecing it back there. So it's funny at talking to jurors after how they like try to ask me questions about, what about this? I said, I don't put on the case. I have no knowledge about the facts. I don't present anything. So I can't answer those questions for you. So, but sometimes I have to educate the jurors about, sometimes you don't get DNA. Sometimes, there's a backlog in the lab that nobody knows about, about trying to get things tested and what they test. So it's the TV shows really don't do us any favors as far as like trying to, run a criminal courtroom, because everybody's expectations are something from TV, and it's just not that. There's just expectations, I would say, by even defendants, witnesses, victims, about the process. Like it's, you come into a courtroom and take a witness stand, and you're going to get asked questions by both sides, right? So you're going to have a direct examination and a cross-examination, where sometimes witnesses just feel like they could just come in and say their piece and leave. Well, it's not how it works, right?
It's not like on TV.
Right. Or attorneys don't get to just say things, right? Like in those shows, they get to argue things, that are not facts, nothing presented, just making these like it's just not how it works.
I always love when they pull the evidence that nobody knows about, and that just got delivered to them 2 hours before the trial.
Right, exactly. And I think that, because that doesn't happen in real life, that you don't have those things in the courtroom. But that's why I think that a lot of jurors may be quite like, well, why didn't they present DNA, right? And I'm like, well, remember the part where there was a DNA expert that said they tried to test it and they couldn't get anything? Like, did you forget that part of the evidence? You know what I mean? So, asking me why a DNA expert didn't find, a conclusatory match of some sort, right? Well, and that's it's interesting because that's the other thing. There's DNA experts will not give you a match, right? It's not like this is this person's DNA. They'll give you this is 1 in whatever, octrillion, how many zeros you have behind, like 1 in so many people. So the odds are such that it's obviously this person. But there's a lot of DNA experts that the way, as an expert that they testify, they don't just say like, this is a match. They have to say this is a match to this degree of scientific certainty. Right.
Again, that's something that's missing from TV shows.
Right. So it's, that tends to like surprise people. Like, well, why can't they just say it's them? Like, well, let's listen to the testimony of the expert. They explain it to you. Right. So there's a lot of things that TV is TV, but I think because a lot of people watch TV, they have these expectations when they come into a courtroom. So, and for instance, such as witnesses just trying to say whatever they want to say without being asked the question, right? Or somebody in a gallery like standing up and objecting when that's not your role, right? To just stand up and I can't have any disruptions in the courtroom, so you got to ask them to leave, especially in front of a jury, right? So there's a lot of that goes on, that it's more what I would say just the kind of disruptive behavior, and I think it's caused by a lack of knowledge of how to act in a courtroom or your expectations in a courtroom, right? Every trial is interesting, I'll say that.
Let's talk about the jury duty. You must have heard every excuse imaginable why someone cannot be the juror in a case. What are some of those excuses that people come up with?
Yeah, sometimes people say, well, he's guilty no matter what. Okay, well, people will come up with, I think from my experience, people come up with some excuses, but it's more of just, you could tell that they just don't, they have to work, a lot of it is just, well, I just don't want to, and I don't believe in guns, or, just try to I don't believe in domestic violence. I'm like, well, I don't think anybody believes in domestic violence. So, that's not the point.
They're trying to show bias from the get-go.
Yeah, they're trying to show bias in a way, right? Well, I don't like gangs, things to that effect. And I have to explain, well, I don't think anybody likes gangs, or I don't think anybody's support of domestic violence. That's not the issue. It's whether you could listen to the evidence and apply the law and decide the case with, your 11 fellow jurors. So it becomes a lot of explanation. But I think there's people who, and it seems, I guess, maybe a little better in my mind. And I'm hoping it's because of my kind of opening statements to jurors that they feel a little better about serving as jurors. Because one of the things I say is, next to military service, serving as a juror is one of the most important aspects of being a citizen of this country, because it is a jury trial is one of the unique things about the U.S. Justice system, right? So you need people to serve as jurors, and you need people to take their time and do that public service as a citizen. So I tried to kind of talk about that in my opening remarks, so that people kind of take it seriously and don't think that it's not, it doesn't mean anything if I get off of jury duty, or because I try to impress that it does mean a lot, that people try to, take the time and be selected as jurors. But of course, you're going to have, somebody that has work requirements that, it really is going to be a big financial hardship. I'll take that into consideration, obviously. School or work is usually not an excuse, but if somebody's being genuine and explaining, why they can't serve for one reason or another, whether it's a financial hardship. There's caretakers, right? They have to take care of, somebody that's disabled, or an elderly parent, or 5 young children, that is something that I have them share with us, so that we can give those people some accommodation especially if the parties agree to give them the accommodation. So, silly excuses, yes, I usually don't tolerate them. But I obviously, I'd like people to be comfortable enough to share what the hardship is. And then I could explain to them, well, that's something that I feel or I understand, but, jury service is very important. So if you get selected, you need to serve.
So what would you say to someone who's listening to this podcast and just got their jury summons in the mail?
Show up.
And they're trying to conceive the master plan of how they're not going to, be selected.
Right. Well, once again, I would say don't do it. Don't do that, right? When you get a jury service summons, go to your jury service summons. Obviously, if there's, I think it's if you're over a certain age, you can get exempted or whatever. There's certain things that you could call and say, can you put my name in for next time because I'm out of town, right, or something. I mean, it's all reasonable excuses, but don't try to automatically get a jury summons. Like, how do I get out of this? Like, no, your focus should be, oh, this is great. How can I serve as a juror, right? That's what I try to impart on people. It doesn't work too much.
Doesn't work too often. Do lawyers make good jurors, or are they getting dismissed quite quickly?
I think, but generally speaking, I would say, I think a lot of attorneys do not get selected. I think because the parties, one side or the other, will strike them for one reason or another. But I've had attorneys serve. They serve. I don't think there's any difference about how they serve. I know I've heard stories of judges being selected as a juror, but then, of course, the other jurors will, right, go to that judge. Like, what do you think, right? So, I mean, everybody can serve. Just because you're a judge or an attorney doesn't mean you shouldn't serve or you can't serve. But, of course, that's up to the parties, right? During jury selection, I think some attorneys vow to never have an attorney on a jury panel, so they just excuse an attorney, which is fine, but I mean, everybody's can serve, so it's just a matter of the attorneys and how do you kind of approach jury selection, who you want to serve. I love doing jury trials. Everybody in the criminal division will tell you I love doing juries as a prosecutor. I mean, there's probably one year where I would do 20 plus juries. I do back-to-back murder trials. I just love the concept and the being able to present to 12 people the evidence and then argue it for your side and then just wait to see if 12 people could come to like a unanimous decision. I just find that fascinating, and I love that aspect about in the United States about jury trials. And I always loved them as an attorney. I love them as a judge. I love doing juries. And a lot of, attorneys that appear in front of me are like, oh my God, you love doing juries. I said, yes, I do. I love doing juries. And it engages the public, right? I think that's the other aspect of it. It engages people to come in, just, regular people, and sit on a jury. And one of the things that jurors tell me oftentimes is, I really enjoyed this experience. I really learned a lot. I see what happens, and I love that about, people sitting and kind of seeing, okay, and especially criminal juries, right? Because there's so much about crime out there, and, everybody has an opinion about this and that and the other with respect to, the criminal law aspect of things. And it's just great that jurors show up and do their service and do their job, whatever the verdict is. And I mean, to me, it doesn't matter what the verdict is. But to say that, Judge, we really appreciated the what we learned and, doing the service. So I love that aspect. And I think it teaches people and opens a window for people that usually are not involved in, any sort of legal criminal law or civil law or a courtroom for that matter.
Have you ever had a juror that initially tried to get off from serving and then ultimately express the gratitude?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, a lot. Because when they first come in, nobody wants to get picked, right? But then they go through the process, they go through a trial, and I mean, for one thing, criminal trials are, and the same thing in a lot of civil trials are very interesting. These are interesting issues, interesting set of facts. And once they go through the whole process, they're like, oh, just like I said, they're like, this was great. I had a great experience. I'm glad I served. So I see that a lot. And I love that happens, because I think it kind of gives people an idea about what happens in courtrooms, in this day and age of everybody having an opinion about a judge or one thing or another, where they actually experience it and they get it, what happens.
I want to talk about the silence in the room before the verdict or sentence is announced. How do you manage this intensity? I would appreciate if you could walk us through what goes through your mind at that time.
Well, I don't think so. For me, I think because I do it a lot and I've done as a judge, you don't have that stress or anything, because it's almost a relief. Oh, we have a verdict. Thank goodness. Let's go, bring them out. Let's get the verdict. So that silence before the verdict for me as a judge is in no way stressful or, because for me we have a resolution, right? So there's nothing difficult about it or anything like that. But I do know, and as a prosecutor, okay, that time where you're just waiting, I mean, you're just on pins and needles. You're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Oh my God, what's going to happen? There is this, your stomach is doing somersaults, and I mean, you just don't know, because you don't know what's going to happen. You never know what the verdict is.
So much hinges on that, obviously.
Right. So it is, and I'm sure, hearing from defense attorneys, the same kind of idea. And I mean, I could only imagine for, the defendant, somebody who's, awaiting a verdict from 12 people, whether, they're going to spend the rest of their life in jail or not, has to be quite the emotional experience, right? Like the waiting aspect of it. And then when it's about to come, I mean, I'm sure the tensions and the emotions run very high. And it's interesting that you asked that, because one of the things I always have to say before I take a verdict, especially when there's a lot of people in the courtroom, right? When they come in and we have to take a verdict, I have to remind people that this is a courtroom, that, everybody's emotions and tensions run high, because this is a very important moment. But, I have to remind people, no outbursts, no clapping in the courtroom, whatever the verdict may be. And for the most part, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But the reason I have to say it is just because you asked that, like how you asked that question, that there is that tension. There is that, oh my God, what's going to happen? Right. What is the jury going to do? So, I tried to move it along so that it's not too long.
So it's not like on TV that they wait and wait.
But yeah, well, I mean, you have to wait, obviously, however long it takes for a jury. It could take 20 minutes to make the decision. It could take 3 days, right? So the jury deliberation aspect is, but you're not in the courtroom throughout the whole thing. You're just waiting. But once the verdict comes and everybody's assembled, so I have the jury come out, and then I have the foreperson hand the jury verdict over to the sheriff so that I can inspect to make sure that it's signed by all 12 people and that there's nothing, inappropriate signed or whatever. Like, I just kind of want to make sure that the verdict form is in proper order. So there is that waiting time for both sides while I look at it. So now I know the verdict, right? So
how do you keep a straight face?
Oh, you have to. So I keep a straight face. So, and they're all looking at my reaction to see what it is. I'm like, well, I'm not going to.
You're not going to even blink.
I'm not even going to blink. So I, inspect the verdict forms and then I hand them back. So there is that, few seconds that everybody's on pins and needles, and then the foreperson I have the foreperson read the jury verdict. So it is, and I mean, I guess I've been told that it is kind of a TV moment almost, right? That it is something they do see on TV, right? You know, it's pretty formal, and so it's not that fast because you don't want to, rush it through. So
How do you manage your emotions having just read the verdict after listening to all the testimony? You are the first one in a courtroom at that point to know that verdict, and you have to keep a poker face.
Right. That's part of my job, right? I mean, it is. You can't, I mean, whatever the verdict is, it is. You have to accept it. If, after the verdict, somebody wants to argue something and an issue, that's one thing. But, I don't have a personal stake here, right? I mean, my personal stake is I'm a judge and I want to make sure the trial occurred fairly. And whatever the verdict is, the verdict is. I don't have an opinion one way or another about a jury verdict, which is funny because some jurors in the back will be like, so Judge, what would you do? I'm like, well, that's the beauty of jury trials. I don't have to make the decision. You do. So I never have to make the decision about, what I would do if it was a bench trial because it was a jury trial. So I respect the juror's decision. That was their decision based on the evidence, and you leave it at that. You can't, once again, as a judge, you have to be always aware of you're not taking sides. There is no right or wrong verdict. It is what it is. I mean, and whatever is argued in front of you, it's what your analysis is, and you come to the best decision you can based on analyzing it, looking at case law, and then making the best decision you can.
Earlier in our discussion, you said that you leave the work at work, you don't bring it home. But I'm wondering if there ever was a case, a sentence, life in jail, or maybe decades in jail that actually weighed on you personally, and that was something that you actually stuck with after it was over.
Well, I think the best way to answer that is yes, there is definitely cases that I remember that kind of stick with you because they will follow you. There's some cases that just will follow you home. You can't leave them at work because of, especially in the realm of criminal law and the kind of cases I handle, where there's some murder cases that have, really, really bad photos of the scene or, the victim and just kind of gory things, right? Things that you see in, horror movies or that you read about in horror movies. So there's definitely fact scenarios of cases that I have had that they will follow you home. It's just, there's no way of putting it out of your mind. I mean, there's cases I handled as a prosecutor and cases I handled as a judge that I won't go into specifics, but it just, the facts of the case are such that they're unforgettable, right? So you're going to have those, and you're not going to be able to get rid of those, but you just have to manage. Like, these are the facts, and this was kind of an awful case, and you have to just, be able to get your head around it and understand why it's not going away, right? Why you just can't forget about it, leave it at work. Eventually, you forget about it, but you'll always remember. It'll always be in your memory, right? Those certain cases that are of such nature and the factual scenarios that are so just memorable for a variety of reasons that they will stay with you. But you have to just deal with them and understand that, you can't run away from it. Because the more you try to, you just got to deal with it. And I understand why it's sticking with me because of how it was. And, there's no easy answer to that question because the easy answer is that, yes, things follow you home, that you will not forget. The hard answer is, okay, how do you deal with it? You try the best you can, right? So that, you somehow compartmentalize it or just think about it in a certain way or make sure that it doesn't influence you when you're on the bench or even when you're dealing with other people, right? So that doesn't start coming out in your relationships or things like that. So yeah, for the most part, I find that I can leave my work at home, but there's definitely times where, you can, some sleepless nights, I mean, we're all human, right? So it does affect you. How can it not? So you just have to deal with it the best they can.
After a particularly grim trial, how do you decompress and hold on to the feeling that people are inherently good when you see the worst of humanity day in, day out?
Well, that presupposes people are inherently good, right? No, I think what I try to do is, when I say leave work at home, my husband is not a lawyer, so it makes it easier, right? Because I don't really talk about my work at home. My son is not that interested in what I do. But a lot of my friends that I have are, well, some are lawyers, but not a lot of people that are around me. And I think that's what makes it an easier way to deal with it, are not involved in the criminal field, right?
That is a fascinating observation.
So that I'm able to interact with people that have nothing to do with, criminal law or any of this. So, I get to talk about what they do or not focus on whatever bad thing may have happened in court. I get to focus on, something good that my electrician did my husband was an electrician who did, or, some of my other friends that are contractors. Oh, we're building this addition, or some of my friends that are in the fashion business or marketing or, any other aspect of life, which kind of opens me up and not, takes me out of my little realm, where I get to leave that. I don't have to talk about it. And I could focus on all these good things that are happening or all these other things that are happening, because, life goes on. With whatever happens to me, there's other people in the world that have other things going on. And so if you kind of have a lot of that around, I think it makes it easier. Does that make sense?
I think it does.
Yeah.
But I just made this point. It's a very interesting observation that having non-legal friends and crowd around you sort of even limits your ability or your willingness to rethink those scenarios from earlier in the day. There's absolutely no need. And even if you were to recall something or try to discuss it with your friends, they wouldn't get it. So why even bother? And that is an interesting point. I have never thought about it.
And a lot
that
of,
way.
as part of my job, I mean, yes, I could talk about certain cases if it's past, but, I generally, I don't talk about my cases. I don't, a lot of times I can't, or I shouldn't, or it's just, my cases are in the courtroom, and I do get a lot of questions even from some lawyer friends that have nothing to do with criminal law. Like, oh, we want to hear some stories about the courtroom, right? And I hesitate. I mean, I could come up with something that I feel is okay, appropriate. But once again, I'm not going to talk about the horror stories from my cases.
Yeah, you're not going to relive it.
Yeah, I just, I wouldn't want to do that. I don't think it's appropriate to do that. So I don't really talk about my cases. And I'd rather just, if there's funny moments that happen, sure. Because there's every day, something happens or some case happens where it's a funny moment that you're like, oh my gosh, you can't make this up. Right. So, that's fine, because that's on a lighter note and it's not of any substance. But yeah, it's easy. It's just nice to talk about. I'd rather talk about other people and what's going on in their lives, or their kids and how their kids are doing, right? Or, my son had, joined the football team and he just I love talking about things like that, which gets into people's day-to-day lives and something good that's happening, or even when something, a friend gets diagnosed with cancer. Oh, how's she doing? Does she need anything? So your focus is on kind of your community, your friends, and it's not on that bad day you had or that bad image you had. So I think that helps me deal with it.
You must have other things and people in your life to manage.
Right. I think you have to. I mean, because if you don't, then it's you don't have that avenue, right? To kind of, like you said, decompress and get rid of that stress. I mean, it's always going to be there, but you have a way to kind of enjoy life and enjoy other people, and so.
I have this one question that I get asked a lot, and I figured having a chance to talk to you here in the studio, I'm going to pass it on to you. What do you say to those people who ask me, counsel, do I really need a lawyer? Maybe I can just go to court myself and do my best. What do you say to those people?
Well, you can, but once again, I go back to a lawyer is someone who went to law school, knows the procedure, whether it's civil or criminal procedure, knows what the filings are expected, knows these aspects of the law that, somebody who didn't does not. So are you at a disadvantage? Absolutely you are, because you don't know that. So if you don't know the procedure, you're automatically, right, because you're going to come in and I don't know what to do. And if you're supposed to do something to get your case moving and you don't do it, you're out of luck, right? So of course it's a better idea to have a lawyer, okay? But can you do it yourself? Possibly. Can I as a judge help you? I can't help you, but I could try to, make the process go and let you know what the process is. But it's so tough with people who just, who want to represent themselves, who do not know the rules or the procedure that's involved. And then they just want to tell you things, right? And, well, okay, there's a time and place, for a trial or to tell me things, which is fine, but, it's just not the way it works. So I try to explain that to people. I mean, people still may want to represent themselves, and that's fine. They, if they decide to do that, that is their decision, but they have to make that decision eyes wide open, knowing what they're getting themselves into. So I personally probably don't think it's a good idea for people to represent themselves, especially in a criminal case, because your freedom is at stake. So, but I mean, that's someone's choice. And if that's the choice they want to make, as long as they know what they're getting themselves into, that's the choice they make. But yeah, it's a tough one when people choose to do it themselves. Well, and I could imagine in civil cases, it's like, well, do I really need to spend the money, right?
Yes. Why would I pay you a third or whatever
Correct.
the contingency agreement is if I can try to do it myself?
And I think the court system, like in Illinois, it's the Supreme Court. There's commissions on self-represented litigants that have done a lot as far as trying to get the proper forms online so you could fill things out and you could file. So there's a lot of information if you are, because I mean, sometimes it is tough to afford an attorney, right? And how do you tell attorneys to charge less? So there is, I think, the Illinois Supreme Court website, the Illinois courts website, and there's a lot of committees that try to understand that people may not have the money to hire a lawyer, and how can we ease that process for somebody that's self-represented, so that you can try and get the forms and the procedures kind of online so that people could kind of guide themselves through the process. So I think that's a good thing. In criminal cases, the benefit is that there's public defenders. So if somebody needs a lawyer, I have the ability to appoint a public defender to represent them, and they don't have to pay money for a public defender. So I think as the judiciary overall and the justice system and lawyers, we have to understand that sometimes people don't have the money to hire a lawyer. They just don't. And they need one. And so there has to be that fine balance of, I think more lawyers should do more pro bono work. But that's telling lawyers to work for free. But I just think it gives you, you're doing a public service. It gives you, I think, a sense of, you're doing something for the public. And then, obviously you have to make, every lawyer has to make a living and pay off the school debt, as we talked about at the beginning of this. People should have lawyers, but I think there has to be an understanding that some people just can't afford one. And there has to be a way to ease their ability, kind of help them get through the process of the courtroom for whatever it is that, case, whatever kind of case they have.
Have you ever had a pro se defendant that represented him or herself and really shocked you with this lawyering skills they acquired on YouTube or elsewhere?
Yeah, I don't know that they shocked me with their lawyer skills, but I've had several cases that went to jury. I mean, a murder case that, the defendant represented himself. And I would just say that not necessarily surprising because they can be difficult to deal with on regular status dates. But I think the thing that I found was once we have a jury selected and there's a jury, they don't have these outbursts, I guess, for lack of a better description of what happens. And they follow the courtroom rules. They follow my rules. They do what they're supposed to. They cross-examine a witness. They make their argument. They follow the courtroom procedure, So I think if anything, that a little bit surprising that once a jury's out there, they're like, okay, I'm going to do my best lawyering skills, So I have had that happen, yeah.
Do you remember what the verdicts were, whether they were in favor of the defendant?
I believe I've had several. I think for the most part, they were all guilty verdicts. I don't know that I had that I could remember a defendant, but there have been. Like I know of others that tried their own case or represented themselves in a case, and in various cases got a not guilty on a murder or a not guilty on whatever case. Yeah, I mean it has happened where defendants represent themselves and they get a not guilty verdict.
So it's possible, but mileage may vary.
Right. It's possible, right. And it has happened. So that's why I don't, like I said, it's not an easy answer to say, well, everybody should have a lawyer because sometimes it's just not possible or for whatever reason.
So we talked about grim trials, guilty verdicts, horrendous crimes. Let's shift gears and talk about the positive things for a few minutes. Can you recall a case, a defendant that really showed that our legal system works and turned his or her life around?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is where I have seen defendants that appeared in front of me where they were, whether I sentenced them to some kind of probation that is expungible, right, upon completion. Okay. So we have things such as like a first offender gun probation or a second chance probation or these opportunities where if they complete the probation successfully, it does not go on the record. And some of the things that are required, to do is, such as get a high school diploma or try to get employment or do community service or whatever the conditions of that specific probation may be. Or even if it's a probation where it's a conviction, but, as part of the probation, they have to do some kind of mental health treatment or drug treatment. Even if it took some time or a couple of violations of probation where they were sent into Cook County Jail for whatever limited period of time, a month or two, like 30 or 60 days, where at the end of it, you saw a completely turned around person that you knew from at the beginning of the case. Because they have such a good direction in their life, that they're showing that this is something that happened, that it's never going to happen again. They finished high school, they got a good job, they're or they networked through a community service, or they became involved as a counselor, with the drug treatment program that they used to be a part of, right? Just, there's several of those which you just feel good about, this helped. This wasn't just another, sentence to jail or, something like, but this was actually someone who took advantage of and rehabilitated, because that's a lot of the things for sentencing is, do I see a rehabilitative potential? And I hope to see that in everybody, right? And when you afford somebody an opportunity to rehabilitate or have this chance and and they take and run with it, and then they show you at the end of it where you could like terminate the probation satisfactorily, and you're like, congratulations, it's great. You did a great job. I think that's phenomenal. It just makes you feel good, right? Because that person went from whatever path they were on that led them to committing whatever the crime it was. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be a murder case, but, whatever, drug crime or having a gun or retail theft, whatever, things to that effect. It's just kind of nice to see they've turned their life around. And I mean, a little plug for problem-solving courts in Cook County and kind of around the state. Those are exactly the kind of courtrooms where give people opportunities to, give a lot of support and help them kind of get on a path of, independence for the most part, where they get the education, they get a job, they, work on their mental health or their, drug habit, and they come out of it, like in such a better spot. So I think it's a great thing to see. And that happens more often than people think. I think it happens a lot, and especially the problem-solving courts and these things that we are able to do as far as the second chance probation opportunities. I think it's great. So, and then, in some cases I have seen where the participant that was maybe the witness on a murder case, right? Probably didn't want to come to court and was very afraid or whatever, but kind of got them out of the gang, let's say they were in. That's why they're a witness on the case, right? But come out of that through the experience of the courtroom on the other side where they're, bettered themselves, become more independent, got out of that cycle of gang violence, let's say, or whatever it is. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's horror stories, but then there's beautiful stories where, it's a great thing to see. So,
do you think our legal system is more about rehabilitation or punishment?
I think neither. It's not about either one. I mean, the way our system is set up is when you sentence somebody, you have to look at one of the things, rehabilitative potential. Obviously, another thing, it's a sentence, it's a punishment. So it's kind of both. It's both, really. I mean, you have to try to come up with something that you find is appropriate as a judge based on the facts in front of you, considering all factors of mitigation, all factors of aggravation, to get to something. So it's not like, okay, all I want to do is punish this guy. No, that's not how you do it.
It's a hybrid.
Right. It's not either. That's the way it should be, right? It shouldn't be one or the other. It's got to be a combination.
I ask this question because quite often I get asked by family, friends, clients, oh, did you see this news report? Do you think he got enough? He should have gotten more, right?
Everybody thinks that, right? Or he should have gotten off with that case, or he should have gotten more years. Well, and that's what I mean. I mean, the public's going to have an opinion. Okay, they are. And it's everybody has a right to their opinion and what they see. But what I like to get out there a lot of the times is that, well, you're not there in the courtroom. You're not there to know all the facts. You're not there to know, for purposes of a sentencing, all the mitigation and the aggravation. You're not there in a courtroom when maybe the victim of a particular crime makes a statement to the defendant in open court, and then the defendant makes a statement to that victim's family that is so powerful, and then that your decision in the sentencing is why you did it because of the things that they said to each other.
That's
right?
a great point.
In a courtroom, and you weren't there for that. So when you have a victim's family saying to a defendant, let's say, I don't think time in jail is something that we're looking for, but you should do something about, for people that have gone through this or that or the other, right? Like, and then the defendant saying, I'm really sorry. This was something that, should have never happened. I'm remorseful, and I'm planning on doing everything I can to help other people not have to go through that. And then the victim's mom hugging the defendant afterwards.
That is powerful.
I mean, and then, yes, he's got probation. And yes, it was probably something that people were like, why would he get probation for that, right? But they weren't in the courtroom to experience that. So it's easy to say, oh, yeah, he should have gotten more for that, right? And I get it. I appreciate it. I take no offense, as a judge to that, because I don't. But it's just, I would just caution people that you're not there in the courtroom. You're not there to know what was said. You're not, you don't know all the facts. You don't know everything. And I mean, and if you don't, well then, don't try to criticize, I should say, as much, without knowing everything. So.
And for those people, I guess, who read those news and think they could do better, next time you get your jury duty summons, show up.
Right. Well, exactly.
Maybe you can do better.
Right. And then you could sit on a jury and make the decision, right? So, yeah, I mean, I would encourage everyone to, if especially jury service is like such an easy way to kind of have a view of what goes on in a courtroom. And just that jury service could help kind of give you an idea, a better look at what actually happens, right? As opposed to kind of not ever wanting to be in court, but then having an opinion about what happens in court all the time, right?
That seems to be the trend these days.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and I really, as a judge, I mean, we're a third branch of government. We are an independent branch. And, sometimes it gets to a point where people don't realize, we're an independent branch. We're not on anybody's side. That's not what, as judges, are there bad judges? Of course. Are there bad apples in every profession? Of course. I'm sure, but for the most part, I mean, we have to take an evaluation and interpret the law and do our job in interpreting the law as the third branch of government, analyze it, and come to a decision. I mean, even in the U.S. Supreme Court, you're going to have justices that disagree, right? Because great legal minds can have different opinions as to a legal issue.
That's true.
But we are still independent. We're not doing something because of a political bias, right? We're doing it because of what the law says. So, sometimes I'll give a plug for judges that we should, you should kind of understand that we are an independent, body, a third branch of government in the United States.
From your seat as a felony court judge, what advice do you have for parents whose children, quite often adult children already, have trouble with the law for the first time in their life?
Well, I mean, try to do the best you can to stop them from going into a courtroom or being arrested, right? I mean.
So your job starts much sooner.
Right, yeah. I mean, by the time they get in front of me, it's hard to give advice to parents other than, at that point, we kind of, the system takes over. You got to go through the process, right? So at that point, it's more of the job of the defense attorney, whoever's defending their child or, adult child or teenager that is now in a felony courtroom in front of me to explain the process. Because at that point, really not much advice I could give, right? I mean, we're here. So whatever has happened, and now we got to go through this process, and, your defense attorney is there to represent your son or daughter in this particular case, and he's got to do his job. The prosecutor has to do their job, and I have to do mine. So it's not much advice you could give, really, at that point. It's just more of, this is the process.
How does seeing the worst case scenarios that play out in court influence your personal conversations with the children in your family, in your friend circle? How does that conversation or the talk that Judge Walowski has with those teenagers in your circle look like?
I think it's, as a judge and the experiences I have, right? in my personal life, I mean, it affects me to the extent of I see what can happen, right, under certain situations. So, I think it just adds to my ability to try to give young kids or teenagers, just good advice of how to, live their life without getting involved with, drugs or, with, a bad element of people that might be influencing you to do something wrong, because these are the consequences, and I have seen the consequences, right? So, I mean, I have speaking engagements in grammar schools and high schools. Obviously, I don't, go into specific facts of cases, but that experience that I have, and as to what the process is and what can happen to you eventually, you could try to say, look, you don't want this to happen, right? And try to not do that bad thing, right? I mean, it's easier said than done, but I mean, I think if anything, if they choose to take the advice, I mean, it's coming from that spot for me, where I see what could happen to somebody that does, takes a bad path and a bad road, and they basically end up spending the rest of their human life in jail.
Judge, I'm curious, what advice would you give today to a current law student?
Well, I think to current law students, or anyone actually even in college that is looking at what do I want to do with my life in the future, I oftentimes recommend law school. I just think that I know it's kind of a joke amongst lawyers, like, oh, don't ever tell your kids to go to law school, right? But I once again, it goes back to my passion for the law and why I went to law school, because I wanted to become a lawyer, because the law and law school just opens up so many opportunities. Going to law school and graduating law school, you don't have to be what a lot of people think is a lawyer per se, right? Going to law school, and law school in and of itself, I think, is a great experience to go through, because it does challenge you as far as your thinking. I think it requires critical thinking. I think it requires analysis to get through law school. So a lot of people say law school is hard, but it is hard. But you know what? If that's your passion, or just to educate yourself more as far as a thinking process and analysis, it's so beneficial, I think, in life in general, even if you don't become a lawyer, because I think going to law school and the classes you have to take in law school, some of which you may not like, but I think they all kind of evolve around the same concept of, Socratic method, or this analyzing, or this thinking, this critical thinking, this being able to think and take different directions to solve an issue. That's what law school does for you, I think, as opposed to just college. I think when you go to law school, it's kind of specifically teaches you how to think, not what to think, but how to do an analysis and to critically think. And I'm repeating myself, but for the reason that I think it just gives you such opportunity once you graduate, because once you graduate, you have that ability to be able to do that sort of thinking, that analysis, figure out a procedure, figure out something, and that can, lead you to success as far as any type of lawyer you want to be. I mean, I kind of joke with some of my friends' kids who love sports, and they're like, well, we're not going to be lawyers because, we're going to be a sports broadcaster or, a sports agent. I'm like, well, guess what? If you go to law school and you get a law degree, you could be a sports agent. You could represent a lot of these professional players, in their contracts. That's and try true. To get them a better deal. And there's so many avenues you could go with the law. So I'm all for trying to encourage law students, just keep it up. Don't worry about, I know money's a big issue, but, the debt, it's an investment in your future. It really is. And I just think that a law degree can give you so much success. I mean, it did great things for me. I had to pay for my own law school. I mean, my family in no way, I was had to pay for my own college and work through college. And I know it's kind of going back to me, but I think it's my personal experience, like coming from Poland and being an immigrant and, just kind of being focused on, I want to get a law degree, and the things that the law degree opened for me. Even though I decided to be a prosecutor, I was working at a bank, right? I could have gone into commercial banking law, however boring that is. No, I'm just kidding. Not for the commercial lawyers out there. But, just being able to do that, and then having a career as a lawyer, and then being able to campaign and get elected as a judge, and now every 6 years I, have to run for judge and have to get my name out there. And that is all that law school has, that base.
Based on your interactions with lawyers in your courtroom, do you think law school should do a better job at teaching something that you see is lacking on a daily basis?
Law school generally, as I just said earlier, that is great because a lot of the classes do teach you that analytical mind aspect, the critical thinking aspect, because you focus on case law, because that's what our law is kind of based in, is the case law. So that's all important. Legal writing, obviously. But I think the programs in law school that kind of makes them stand out are those real world experiences with real world attorneys, that, you could have some classes or internships or externships that are part of your program that I think would really add to the school.
So more practical law.
Yeah, like the actual practice of law.
Let's jump from law school to the other end of the career spectrum. You've been a judge for 17 years. What's the next step?
Maybe I'll retire soon, and then possibly I do always think about maybe do some more teaching at a law school, which I would love to do upon retirement. But I think I'll, kind of stick around being a judge for a while. And, that takes, as an elected judge, which I am, you have to run for retention every 6 years. So my 6 year, so you get 6-year terms.
Okay.
So next year will be my retention year. So any judge that's been a judge for 6 years, so there's many of us, I don't know, 40, 50, maybe judges, like next year will be on the ballot for the retention ballot. This is just for the retention ballot. So you just vote yes or no. So I will be on the ballot amongst other judges. And next year, I'm sure we'll have some campaigning to try to educate people on what that means. And hopefully people will find that we're doing a good job and say yes to us for retention. So that happens every 6 years.
So when they tally up the vote, what is the percentage? What's the ratio of yes to no that you need to stay retained?
So you need 60% of the yes vote.
Okay.
Right. So of the total vote, you need 60% yeses. So that's what you need. So yeah, there's going to be always a lot of judges on that list because every judge has a 6-year term that's elected. Obviously, there's judges that are not elected, that are associate judges. They get elected by the elected judges. So that's kind of how that works. But yeah, once you run for judge at the beginning, once you get elected, you may have opponents or not, but then you're up, you have a 6-year term. So every 6 years, you're up for retention.
And if you stay with the court for another 6 years, would it be in the same division?
Not necessarily. Like I said, depending on the need of where judges are needed. I mean, I'm happy where I am. I think I do a good job where I am. So you hope to stay there. But I mean, things change in the future. So I never close doors to anything. I'm close to that retirement age. So we'll see. But, another retention is coming up next year. So I will do that. And then we'll go from there.
Well, Judge, thank you very much for accepting the invitation. This was a fascinating conversation.
I appreciate it.
And I wish you all the best in your retention bid next year.
And maybe next time we could try it in Polish. Even I would love to do it in Polish and kind of test out my Polish language skills. Ale trochę nie jestem, słowa nie mogę, tak nie przychodzą mi tak łatwo. To muszę mówić po angielsku.
That's fine. Judge, thank you. This was great. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
A huge thank you to Judge Ursula Walowski for that powerful and deeply human conversation. I am Greg Czubernat. Thanks for going off the record with me today. If you found this episode meaningful, hit subscribe, share it with someone who believes in justice, and visit Czubernatlaw.com to learn more about my work.